Okay, so I'm going to show you how to use Kitchener stitch to graft two pieces of knitting back together. Now the first thing to do is to cut your yarn to a circumference about 3 times the circumference of the work that you want to graft together. So just measure your wool 3 times around your circumference and then cut it, and then thread it onto a tapestry needle. Now, depending on the circumference that you are grafting, you may find that you have a really quite a long tail to deal with at first. This will become more manageable as you make your way along the round. And so what we are looking to do is to bring the two left-hand needles together, and you're looking to graft these stitches together, and you'll work your way all the way around until you reach the end of those stitches. So Kitchener stitch, it's quite tricky it seems quite tricky when you first see it, but it does have a reasonably predictable pattern that you can get used to. So you're always working 2 stitches from each needle at a time, and each time the first stitch comes off the needle when you work it. So you'll work this stitch, that stitch will come off the needle, and you'll work into the second stitch on that needle. Then you go to the top and you do the same. This stitch is worked first and it comes off the needle, and then to the second stitch. The second stitch is worked and then that comes off the needle. And the pattern that you're working in is knitwise, purlwise, purlwise, knitwise, knitwise, purlwise, purlwise, knitwise. I'll show you what that looks like. So you come in knitwise through the first stitch, and that stitch comes off your needle. I've got a very long yarn end here, so bear with me. So that stitch comes off the needle. Then go into the second stitch purlwise. That stitch stays on the needle. So I've got knitwise, purlwise on the bottom needle. Then on the top needle, I do the reverse of that. So I go purlwise through the first stitch, that stitch comes off the needle, and then knitwise through the second stitch, that stitch stays on the needle. Pull all of that through. Now to start with, your stitches are going to be really loose, but it will become easier as you work. So that's the pattern. Repeat that pattern again. So on the bottom needle, knitwise, stitch comes off the needle, purlwise, stitch stays on the needle. And you'll notice I'm doing 2 stitches each time before I stop to pull the yarn through. That just saves you a bit of time. And then the top needle, needle goes purlwise through that stitch comes off the needle, knitwise into the second stitch, that stitch stays on the needle. Okay, and you keep working in that way. Each time I'm just pulling it just until the yarn feels snug, but I will show you in a minute how to go back and pull those stitches in a little bit tighter if you need to. I do find that I need to do that as I'm going along. I'll show you one more time. Knitwise, off the needle, purlwise, and then to the top needle, purlwise, off the needle, knitwise. Okay, and that I'm going to work that a few more times, and I'll show you how to tighten up those stitches if you need to. Okay, so I've worked a slightly longer section of Kitchener stitch now, and I just wanted to pause just to remind you that when you are working Kitchener stitch, you are creating another round of knit stitches in your work. And to make this grafting as invisible as possible, it is really worth taking the time to just check that the knit stitches you're creating are the same size as the rows above and below the one that you're working here. So if, for example, you feel like some of the stitches are a little bit loose, then you can just pull on the leg of those stitches and transfer that excess all the way down to the end of your yarn to make sure that you're maintaining the same gauge as closely as you possibly can. Equally, if you're pulling the stitches too tight and you need to add some slack further back where you've been working, you can do the same thing in reverse, essentially. Pass that slack back down the line to where you need it. But it is worth doing that every sort of inch or so as you work to make sure that you're really happy with the gauge of the stitches that you're creating, because you don't want to be able to see any change in tension between this row of Kitchener stitch versus the other knits, the knit rounds either side of it. Okay, so I've reached the last 2 stitches of the round. Now, if you're working in the round, I just want to show you how to finish that off to make sure that you get a really neat finish and no obvious join in the round. So you work the last 2 stitches as the previous pattern, so knitwise followed by purlwise on the bottom stitch, on the bottom needle, sorry, purlwise and then knitwise on that top needle. And then you work the same pattern again onto those last 2 stitches, the only difference being that the second stitch is not on the needles. So you go in knitwise through that first stitch on the bottom needle, and then you're looking to go purlwise through the stitch next to it, which is off your needles already. And that will give you a really neat finish on your Kitchener stitch. The same thing here. So you go in purlwise through this stitch, and then you're looking for that first stitch that you worked into, which I believe is there. You go in purlwise through that stitch. And then all that's left is to take your yarn through to the wrong side and make sure all your stitches are nice and tight and even, and weave in the ends. Okay, so that is Kitchener stitch. I hope it helped.